Pearl Callahan knew the moment she saw Deputy Nathan Crow walk through those saloon doors that her carefully constructed survival would shatter. 6 years she'd perfected the art of being invisible while serving whiskey to the most corrupt men in Black Hollow. 6 years of swallowing their secrets, their crimes, their casual cruelty. But when the law finally raided the saloon and dragged its owners into daylight, Pearl became collateral damage, homeless, scorned, marked guilty just for surviving in the wrong place. Then Nathan did something unthinkable. He offered her shelter, knowing it would destroy them both. Some bridges you cross knowing they'll burn behind you. If you're hooked already, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Pearl's story travels. The whiskey stung Pearl's split knuckle as she wiped down the bar for the third time that hour. Blood mixed with liquor, both wasted on wood that had absorbed worse over the years. She didn't look up when the doors swung open. Looking up meant acknowledging. Acknowledging meant conversation. Conversation meant vulnerability. Afternoon? The voice carried no threat, which immediately made her wary. Pearl had learned to read danger in the first syllable a man spoke. This one sounded almost apologetic for existing. She glanced up. The badge caught lamplight first. Tin star pinned slightly crooked on a vest that had seen better days. Deputy's badge, not sheriff. Second in command meant ambition or punishment, and she couldn't tell which yet. The man wearing it stood just inside the doorway like he wasn't sure he belonged there. Maybe he didn't. "Bar's open," Pearl said. "Your money's good as anyone's." Nathan Crow, she'd learn his name later, overhear it when Sheriff Briggs came collecting his share of the week's take, stepped forward with none of the swagger she'd come to expect from men with authority. He didn't scan the room for weaknesses or entertainment, didn't let his eyes linger on her neckline or calculate what her smile might cost. "Just coffee if you've got it." "This is a saloon." "I know what it is." He settled onto a stool, movements careful, deliberate. Still asking. Pearl studied him. Mid-30s probably. Lines around his eyes suggested either too much sun or too much thinking. Calloused hands but clean fingernails. A man who worked but cared about details. Dangerous combination. "No coffee," she lied. "Whiskey or nothing." "Then I'll take nothing and pay for the conversation." He slid a silver dollar across the bar. Pearl stared at it like it might bite her. In 6 years, no man had ever paid for just conversation. They paid for whiskey, for company, for the fantasy that a woman serving drinks actually gave a damn about their problems. But conversation as its own commodity? That was new. That was unsettling. She pocketed the dollar. "You're wasting your money, deputy." "Nathan. And maybe. But I'd rather waste it here than down at Rosie's place where the coffee tastes like boot leather." Despite herself, Pearl almost smiled. "What makes you think I'm better company than boot leather?" "Didn't say you were. Just said the coffee's worse there." This time she did smile, brief and sharp as a knife flash. "You're not like the others who come through here." "No? No, you actually look at faces." Nathan met her eyes steady. "Most people do, I'd imagine." "You'd imagine wrong." Pearl grabbed a clean glass, actually clean, not just rinsed, and poured herself water from the pitcher she kept hidden beneath the bar. "Men who come here look at bodies, deputy, at what they can take." "You're looking at me like I might have something to say worth hearing. That's unusual enough to be suspicious." "Maybe I am suspicious." "Of what?" "Of how a place this crooked stays standing without anyone asking questions." The glass stopped halfway to Pearl's mouth. She set it down carefully, too carefully. Around them, the saloon maintained its afternoon lull. 3 card players arguing over a bent ace, old Marcus snoring in the corner booth, Lily upstairs with a railroad foreman who'd paid for an hour. Normal. Everything devastatingly normal, while this deputy with gentle eyes talked about things that got people killed. "You should leave," Pearl said quietly. "Probably. I mean it. You don't know what you're poking at." Nathan leaned back slightly, giving her space but not retreating. "Then tell me, why would I do something that's stupid?" "Because you've been counting minutes in this place for 6 years. Pearl's breath caught. "How do you—" "Sheriff Briggs mentioned it, bragged about it actually, said you were here when he first made deputy himself, back when the previous owner ran things. Said you'd seen 3 owners come and go, but you stayed steady. He thought it was loyalty." Nathan's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped lower. I think it's imprisonment. You don't know anything about me. I know you're smart enough to survive 6 years in a place that chews people up. I know you notice everything. You've glanced at every person in here twice since I sat down, tracking movements, calculating threats. And I know you just lied about the coffee because there's a pot on the back table behind you still steaming. Pearl's jaw tightened. Being observant in your line of work, that makes sense. Being observant in mine, that's just survival. Exactly. So survive this conversation by telling me what I need to know. And what's that? How deep the rot goes. The words hung between them like smoke. Pearl had imagined this conversation 1,000 times over 6 years. Imagined someone finally asking the right questions. Imagined herself brave enough to answer. But imagination was safe. This was something else entirely. If I answer you, she said slowly, I'm dead. If you don't answer, you're already dead. Just taking longer. He wasn't wrong. Pearl looked at him, really looked, the way she'd trained herself not to look at customers because looking meant caring and caring meant weakness. Nathan Crow didn't have the face of a crusader. He looked tired. He looked like someone who'd seen enough ugliness to stop being shocked by it, but hadn't yet stopped being angry. The sheriff, Pearl started, then stopped. Her voice had dropped to barely audible. Sheriff Briggs takes 30% of everything that moves through here. Whiskey, cards, girls. 30% plus whatever he skims when he raids the competition. The owner, Mr. Blackwell, he pays it regular as clockwork. First Monday of every month. Nathan's expression didn't change. That's common enough in rough towns. What else? Common? You think? Pearl bit off the words. The city council knows, they all know. Councilman Verner, Judge Haskins, even Reverend Michaels. They don't just know. They take cuts. This saloon's the hub of it, Deputy. Every crooked land deal, every forged survey, every stolen claim, the paperwork moves through here, hidden in whiskey crates. Men come in pretending to play cards, but really they're signing off on theft. Legal theft, because the judge made it legal. The card player's argument rose briefly. Pearl waited until it settled before continuing. 3 months ago, a homesteader named Sykes came into town claiming someone stole his land boundary markers, pushed his fence line back half a mile. He filed a complaint with the sheriff. Week later, Sykes left town sudden. No forwarding address. His land got auctioned for back taxes he didn't owe. Councilman Verner's son bought it for pennies on the dollar. Did you see the paperwork? Saw Verner and Blackwell toasting over it right where you're sitting. Heard every word. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. His hands rested flat on the bar, steady. How many others like Sykes? In 6 years, dozens, maybe more. The homesteaders, they don't stand a chance. They file claims, work the land, build their futures. Then some technicality appears, boundary dispute, missed payment, contested water rights. Always something legal enough that they can't fight it. The land gets auctioned. The same families buy it every time. Verner, Haskins, the Blackwells. They're carving up the county piece by piece. And you've been watching this whole time. I've been surviving this whole time. There's a difference. Is there? The question hit harder than Pearl expected. She'd spent 6 years telling herself that silence was survival, that keeping her head down meant staying alive. But Nathan's quiet challenge suggested maybe survival wasn't living. Maybe it was just dying slower. Why are you asking me this? Pearl kept her voice level despite the fear crawling up her spine. Why not ask the sheriff directly? Because the sheriff's either part of it or blind to it. Either way, he won't help. And you think I will? Risk my life telling you things that'll get me buried in an unmarked grave out past the canyon? Nathan met her eyes. I think you're already risking your life every day you stay silent. At least this way the risk might mean something. Before Pearl could respond, the saloon doors banged open hard enough to rattle the windows. Sheriff Briggs strode in, trailing trail dust and authority. He was a big man, barrel-chested, with a mustache he groomed more carefully than his soul. Nathan! His voice boomed across the room. The hell you doing wasting time in here? We got rounds to make. Nathan stood smoothly, no hurry in his movements. Just having a drink, sir. Having a... Briggs caught sight of Pearl, and his expression shifted, became something uglier. Oh, I see. Taking advantage of the local hospitality, are we? Pearl kept her face blank. He was just leaving, Sheriff. I'm sure he was. Briggs stepped closer to the bar, his presence aggressive despite the smile. You treat my deputy right, Pearl. Give him the quality service we pay good money to maintain. The words carried implications that made Pearl's stomach turn. She'd endured this dance 1,000 times, powerful men making her complicit in their assumptions, forcing her to smile while they degraded her. He asked for coffee, Pearl said flatly. I told him we don't serve it. Briggs laughed, loud and mean. Course you don't. Coffee's for church ladies and school teachers. Places like this serve stronger stuff. He grabbed Nathan's shoulder with false camaraderie. Come on, deputy. Let's leave the lady to her work. Nathan let himself be steered toward the door but glanced back once. The look carried a promise Pearl couldn't quite interpret. Then they were gone, and she was alone with the card players, sleeping Marcus, and Lily's footsteps creaking overhead. Pearl released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That was Tuesday. By Friday, everything had burned down. The raid happened just before dawn, coordinated and brutal. Federal marshals, not local law, which should have been Pearl's first warning that this was bigger than Saturday night drunk and disorderly. They came through the front and back simultaneously, badges high, rifles higher. Pearl was asleep in her tiny room off the kitchen when the doors splintered. Everyone on the floor, now! She hit the floorboards, nightgown tangled around her legs, heart slamming against her ribs. Through her doorway, she could see marshals flooding the main room. Mr. Blackwell was shouting something about warrants and rights, his voice high with panic. Lily screamed upstairs, glass shattered. We have a warrant to search these premises for evidence of illegal gambling, extortion, money laundering, and facilitation of property fraud. Property fraud. The words cut through Pearl's terror with crystalline clarity. Someone had finally listened. Someone had finally looked past Black Hollow's respectable surface and seen the rot underneath. A marshal appeared in her doorway, young and stone-faced. You, Pearl Callahan? Her mouth was too dry to answer. She nodded. Get dressed. You're coming with us for questioning. I didn't do anything. That's what they all say. Get dressed. Pearl scrambled into her day dress, fingers fumbling with buttons. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of the raid's efficiency. Ledgers seized, floorboards pried up, the false panel behind the bar where Blackwell kept the real accounting books yanked open. They knew exactly where to look. This wasn't speculation. Someone had provided a map. Nathan. It had to be Nathan. It had to be. They hauled her out into the gray pre-dawn alongside Lily, Marcus, 3 dealers, and Mr. Blackwell himself. The street was lined with townspeople drawn by the commotion. Respectable folks in nightclothes and judgment, watching the saloon's inhabitants get paraded like criminals. Pearl kept her head up. She'd learned long ago that shame only had power if you let it. The questioning lasted 6 hours in a cramped office that smelled like old paper and suspicion. The federal marshal was a weathered man named Coleman who'd clearly heard every lie ever invented. I need you to understand your position, Miss Callahan. We have documents. We have testimony. We have enough evidence to prosecute multiple officials for systematic corruption, but we need someone who saw it happening, someone who can testify to the mechanics of how it worked. I served drinks. You served drinks and watched crimes unfold for 6 years. Don't insult my intelligence. Pearl stared at her hands. If I testify, I'm dead. You know that. Soon as your marshals leave town, I'm dead. If you don't testify, the people responsible walk free and this whole county stays rotten. How many more families lose their land? How many more people get crushed by a system that's supposed to protect them? That's not my responsibility, isn't it? Coleman leaned forward. You've had a front row seat to this corruption for 6 years. You could have spoken up any of those years. You chose silence. Now you get to choose again, but this time the consequences are bigger. I chose survival. And what kind of life has that given you? The question burned. Pearl thought about her windowless room, her tips hidden in a coffee can, her careful invisibility. She thought about watching families destroyed and saying nothing. She thought about Nathan Crow asking her how deep the rot went. If I testify, she said slowly, I need protection. We'll do our best. Your best isn't good enough. I need to disappear. New town, new name, enough money to start over where nobody knows what I've done. Coleman studied her. That's complicated. Being murdered's pretty complicated too. He almost smiled. Let me see what I can arrange. But arrangements took time. And time was something Pearl didn't have. They released her that afternoon with instructions to stay available for follow-up questions. When she stepped out of the marshal's office into the late-day sun, the stares hit her like physical blows. She was marked now, tainted by association with the raid, with the investigation, with the disruption of Black Hollow's careful corruption. It didn't matter that she'd been arrested, questioned, released. In the eyes of the town, she'd been inside when the raid happened, which made her complicit. Guilty by proximity, Pearl walked back toward the saloon only to find it shuttered, chains on the doors, a notice of seizure posted on the boards. Her room, her few possessions, her 6 years of life, all locked behind federal chains. They're not letting anyone back in. She turned. Nathan stood a few yards away, hat in hand, expression careful. You did this. Pearl's voice was flat. You took what I told you, and you burned my life down. I did what was right. Right? She laughed, bitter and sharp. You have any idea what you've done to me? I have nothing. No job, no home, no money. The whole town thinks I cooperated with the marshals. I'm marked, deputy. You marked me. Nathan absorbed this without flinching. I know. You know. That's it? That's your response? I know, and I'm sorry, and I'm offering you a way forward if you'll take it. Pearl wanted to hit him, wanted to scream, to rage, to make him understand that righteousness was easy when you had a badge and a salary. But she was tired, bone-tired in a way that went deeper than sleepless nights. What way forward? I have a house. Small place, nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, one's empty. The offer hung between them, impossible and insane. You're joking. I'm not. You can't. The town will. Nathan, they'll destroy you. Probably. He settled his hat back on his head. But you need a place to stay and I have a room. Mathematics is pretty simple. Mathematics? This isn't mathematics. This is social suicide. Unmarried deputy takes in former saloon girl? You might as well paint a target on both our backs. Maybe. But the alternative is you sleeping in an alley or accepting charity from men who'll expect payment in ways you're tired of paying. I'm offering you a room, Pearl. Just a room. No expectations, no strings. You can stay until you figure out what comes next. Pearl searched his face for the angle, the hidden cost, the inevitable betrayal. She'd spent 6 years learning to read men's lies, but Nathan's expression remained steady, open, either genuinely kind or dangerously good at faking it. Why would you do this? Because it's right. That's not a reason. That's a platitude. Nathan was quiet for a moment. My sister worked in a place like Blackwell's Saloon. Different town, different circumstances, but same situation. She died there. Took laudanum one night and didn't wake up. I was 17, too young to help her, too ignorant to know she needed helping. When I found her, she had bruises on her arms and 43 cents in her pocket. 43 cents for a whole life. He met Pearl's eyes. I can't help my sister, but I can help you. If you'll let me. The grief in his voice was real. Pearl knew real grief, had seen enough of it in mirrors over the years. This wasn't manipulation. This was a man still carrying his sister's ghost and trying to make peace with it however he could. One night, Pearl said finally, I'll stay one night while I figure out where to go. Fair enough. Nathan's house sat at the end of a dusty street where the town's respectability began to fray into prairie. Small wooden structure, well-maintained but spare. A garden plot showing early green shoots. A horse in a small corral out back. The kind of place a single man with modest means and modest dreams might build. Bedrooms through there. Nathan gestured to a door off the main room. Lock works from the inside if that makes you more comfortable. I'll be in the other room. There's bread and cheese in the kitchen if you're hungry. Pearl stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in someone else's life. I don't have anything. No clothes, no money, nothing. It's all locked in the saloon. We'll figure it out tomorrow. You keep saying we. Do I? Like we're a team or something. We're not. You're a deputy who made a choice. I'm a casualty of that choice. That's not a partnership. Nathan nodded slowly. You're right. Poor word choice. You'll figure it out tomorrow. Better? Despite everything, Pearl almost smiled. Slightly. She took the offered room, locked the door, and sat on the narrow bed in the gathering darkness. Through the thin walls, she could hear Nathan moving around, the soft sounds of evening routine, water poured, boots removed, a chair scraped across floor. Normal sounds, safe sounds, sounds she hadn't heard in 6 years of sleeping in a saloon where every creak might be danger. Pearl lay back and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd need to face the consequences of surviving. Tomorrow the town would solidify its judgment of her. Tomorrow everything would be harder. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, she slept behind a locked door in a room where no one could buy access to her with a silver dollar and a smile. It wasn't redemption, but it was rest, and sometimes that was enough to survive one more day. Morning arrived with the sound of voices outside Nathan's house, low, deliberate, the kind of talk that happened when people wanted to be overheard. Pearl woke to it, disoriented for a moment before memory crashed back. The raid, the questioning, Nathan's impossible offer. She was in a deputy's spare bedroom wearing yesterday's dress and tomorrow's trouble. She cracked the door open. Nathan stood at the front window, coffee cup in hand, watching the street. His posture was relaxed, but his jaw was tight. "How many?" Pearl asked. 7 at last count. Mrs. Henderson, the Pryor sisters, Councilman Werner's wife. Others I don't recognize. He didn't turn from the window. They're not being subtle about it. Pearl joined him at the window. The women clustered on the street corner within clear sight of the house, their conversation animated, their glances pointed. As Pearl watched, Mrs. Henderson said something that made the others nod vigorously. "What are they waiting for?" "Me to leave for rounds. Then they'll come knock on the door, offer you charity and judgment in equal measure, try to get you to leave town quietly." "How do you know?" "Because it's what respectable people do when they want to feel good about themselves while solving a problem." Nathan finally looked at her. "You don't have to answer the door." "And give them more ammunition? The fallen woman too ashamed to face decent society?" Pearl's laugh was sharp. "I've been judged by better people than them. I can handle a few church ladies with opinions." "I don't doubt it. I'm just saying you don't owe them anything." "I don't owe you anything either." "True enough." The words came out harsher than Pearl intended, but Nathan just nodded and drained his coffee. "I've got to make rounds. There's eggs and salt pork in the kitchen. Help yourself." "Where's the nearest boarding house?" Nathan paused in reaching for his coat. "The Riverside takes women, but Mrs. Chen, who runs it, won't rent to you. Not after yesterday." "How do you know?" "Because I already asked her last night after you fell asleep. Offered to pay first and last month up front. She refused. Said her reputation couldn't survive housing a woman from Blackwell's." Pearl absorbed this quietly. "What about the Palmer house?" "They don't rent to single women at all." "The rooms above the dry goods store?" "Full up, I checked." "You checked everywhere." It wasn't a question. Nathan met her eyes. "I checked everywhere." After he left, Pearl stood in the small kitchen, feeling the weight of limited options. She could leave Black Hollow entirely, except she had no money and no belongings. She could throw herself on the mercy of the federal marshals, except they'd made clear their protection was temporary at best. Or she could stay here in Nathan's spare room and become the scandal that destroyed both their lives. The knock came 20 minutes later. Pearl had expected it, but still her stomach tightened. She opened the door to find Mrs. Henderson flanked by the Pryor sisters like righteous bookends. "Miss Callahan?" Mrs. Henderson's voice dripped concern the way a wound dripped infection. "We heard about your situation and felt it was our Christian duty to check on your welfare." "How kind." Pearl kept her tone neutral. "As you can see, I'm well, but you're staying here. In a bachelor's home, unchaperoned." Elizabeth Pryor clutched her Bible like a shield. "Surely you understand how improper that appears." "I understand that I have nowhere else to go, and Deputy Crow offered me a room. That's the extent of what I need to understand." The women exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. "We've taken up a small collection, enough for a train ticket to Denver and a week's lodging once you arrive. It seemed the most practical solution for everyone involved." There it was. The bribe dressed up as charity. Pearl had seen this dance before in different contexts. Men offering money to make problems disappear, women offering kindness to maintain their comfort. "That's generous," Pearl said carefully. "But I'm not interested in Denver." "Then San Francisco or Kansas City. Anywhere, really, where you might make a fresh start without the burden of your past. My past isn't a burden, it's what kept me alive. Sarah Pryor flinched like she'd been slapped. We're trying to help you. Are you? Or are you trying to help yourselves feel better about what happened at that saloon while I worked there? Because I noticed none of you are offering charity to Lily or Marcus or any of the others who got thrown out with me. Just me. The one staying in the deputy's house. The one making everyone uncomfortable by still being visible. Mrs. Henderson's face hardened. We're trying to preserve what's left of your reputation. My reputation? Pearl laughed outright. Mrs. Henderson, I served whiskey to your husband 3 nights a week for 4 years. I know exactly how much he drinks and what he talks about when he's 5 glasses deep. I know he lost $200 in a poker game last month and told you it went to church building funds. My reputation is whatever I decide it is, not whatever makes you comfortable at tea parties. How dare you? I dare because I'm already fallen, remember? I've got nothing left to lose by telling the truth. You all want me gone because I'm a reminder. I saw things. I heard things. I know which men pretended to be righteous on Sunday and crooked by Tuesday. That's what makes me dangerous. Not my morals, my memory. The women stood frozen, their charity curdling into something uglier. Finally, Mrs. Henderson drew herself up, spine rigid. You're making a mistake staying here. Deputy Crow is a good man. You'll ruin him. Maybe he's willing to be ruined. Then you're both fools. They left in a rustle of skirts and outrage. Pearl closed the door and leaned against it, hands shaking with adrenaline. She'd burned that bridge thoroughly. No taking it back now. The rest of the morning passed in tense solitude. Pearl tried to make herself useful, washed the breakfast dishes, swept the floor, straightened the already tidy main room. Anything to feel less like a parasite feeding on Nathan's questionable mercy. She was folding a blanket when she found the letters. They were tucked inside a wooden box on the shelf, tied with a faded ribbon. Pearl knew she shouldn't look. Knew it was an invasion of privacy. But 6 years of survival had made her vigilant about knowing who she was dealing with, and Nathan Crow remained a mystery wrapped in a deputy's badge. She untied the ribbon carefully. The letters were old, dated 7 years back, written in a woman's hand. Nathan's sister, Pearl, realized within the first few sentences. Mary Crow. The handwriting started neat and hopeful, then deteriorated over the months into something cramped and desperate. Dear Nathan, I know you worry, but I promise I'm fine. Mr. Garrett treats us girls well, and the money is better than laundry work. Nathan, I need you to stop sending letters asking me to come home. This is my home now. You don't understand how it is for women without family or prospects. Please don't be angry with me. I know what you think, but you weren't there. You didn't see how few choices I had. At least here I'm making my own way. The final letter was different, shorter, written by someone else entirely, Mr. Garrett himself, informing Nathan of Mary's death. Accidental overdose. Peaceful. No pain. The lies were obvious even years later on the page. Pearl had known too many girls who took that final dose of laudanum to believe it was ever accidental or peaceful. She retied the letters with hands that trembled slightly and returned them to their box. Nathan's offer of shelter made more sense now. He wasn't trying to save Pearl. He was trying to save his sister retroactively through whatever proxy he could find. That should have felt insulting. Instead, it felt honest. Better to be someone's grief project than someone's conquest. Nathan returned just after noon with a bundle under his arm. Got your things from the saloon. Had to argue with the federal marshal for an hour, but he finally let me inventory your room and collect your personal effects. Pearl took the bundle. Her spare dress, her hairbrush, the coffee can that held her savings, a few other small possessions. Everything she owned in the world fit in a package she could carry one-handed. Thank you. Mrs. Henderson paid you a visit. News travels fast. In this town, news travels before it happens. Nathan set his hat on the table. What did she want? To buy me a train ticket out of town. I declined. I heard. Apparently you also told her some truths about her husband's drinking habits that she didn't appreciate. Pearl tensed. Is that going to be a problem for you? Probably. Henderson's on the town council. He'll make things difficult. Nathan shrugged. But he was already going to make things difficult. You just accelerated the timeline. I can leave, find somewhere else. We've had this conversation. There is nowhere else. He pulled out a chair and sat. looked at her straight. Pearl, I need to be clear about something. The federal marshals are building their case. They want testimony from witnesses who saw the corruption firsthand. Your testimony specifically. They think you've got the details that'll make the charges stick. I know, Marshal Coleman made that clear. What he might not have made clear is what happens when you testify. The people involved, Verner, Judge Haskins, Sheriff Briggs, the Blackwells, they're not going to accept losing quietly. They've spent years building their network. They'll fight back hard, and you'll be the target. I already figured that out. I'm not sure you have. These aren't men who get their hands dirty. They hire people to do their dirty work. Accidents happen. Witnesses disappear. I need you to understand what you're walking into if you cooperate with the marshals. Pearl sat down across from him. You want me to testify or not? I want you to survive. Those might not be compatible goals. No, they might not be. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I brought this down on you. I took what you told me, and I used it to trigger the investigation. That makes me responsible for what happens next. I'm not your responsibility. Maybe not, but I'm making you my responsibility anyway. Why? Pearl leaned forward. And don't tell me it's because it's right. Don't tell me about your sister. Tell me the real reason you're doing this. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. You want the truth? I want something I can trust. Fine. Truth is, I've spent 3 years as a deputy in towns where the law is whatever the richest man says it is. I've watched sheriffs take bribes, judges sell verdicts, marshals look the other way while powerful men destroy everything they touch. I became a lawman because I thought the law meant something, thought justice was real. But everywhere I've been, it's the same rot under different names. He met her eyes. Then you told me about Sykes losing his land, about families being stolen from piece by piece, and I realized this was my chance, maybe the only chance I'd get to actually do what I signed up for. Make the law mean something, even if just this once. So I'm your redemption project. We're each other's redemption project. You testify, you help bring down the people who've been crushing this county, you make your years at that saloon mean something beyond survival, and I help you stay alive long enough to see it through. We both get what we need. Pearl studied him. You really believe testimony from a saloon girl will be enough? That a judge will take my word over Councilman Verner's, over Sheriff Briggs's, with the documents the marshals seized and your testimony to connect the dots? Yeah, I think it'll be enough. And if it's not, then at least we tried. The simplicity of it was almost offensive. At least we tried, as if trying meant anything against power and money and corruption that had roots deeper than the frontier itself. But Pearl had spent 6 years not trying, staying silent, surviving by being invisible. Look where that had gotten her. When do the marshals want me? Day after tomorrow. They're consolidating evidence, preparing the formal charges. They'll need your deposition first, then likely testimony at the hearing. What happens between now and then? You stay here. Stay out of sight as much as possible. Let me handle the town. The town's going to eat you alive. Nathan smiled slightly. Probably, but I'm tougher than I look. The next day proved him right and wrong in equal measure. Pearl spent most of it inside, watching through windows as the town's judgment solidified into something harder than opinion. Women crossed the street to avoid passing Nathan's house. Men who'd been friendly with Nathan suddenly had urgent business elsewhere when he made his rounds. The minister made a pointed sermon about moral corruption that everyone understood wasn't about the saloon raid. Pearl heard about it that afternoon when Nathan returned looking tired. Reverend Michaels compared you to Jezebel and me to King Ahab. Apparently we're both leading the town to ruin through our sinful cohabitation. I don't know who those people are. Biblical reference. Woman who led a king astray, brought down kingdoms, generally represented wickedness in female form. Pearl snorted. I'm not that organized. Despite himself, Nathan laughed. Fair point. This is only going to get worse. You know that. I know. The sheriff could fire you. He could try. Federal marshals want me on this case. I'm their local contact. Briggs fires me. He looks like he's obstructing justice. Since when does looking guilty stop guilty men? Nathan had no answer for that. That evening, they fell into an uneasy routine. Nathan cooked supper, Pearl cleaned up after, and they sat in the main room as darkness gathered outside. It should have been awkward. Instead, it felt almost normal. which was more disturbing than awkwardness would have been. "Tell me something true," Pearl said abruptly. Nathan looked up from the report he was reading. "About what?" "About you. Something that's not about your sister or being a deputy or saving fallen women. Something real." He set the report aside, considering. "I wanted to be a school teacher." "What?" "Before I became a lawman. I wanted to teach. Loved books, loved learning. Thought maybe I could help kids who came from nothing learn their way into something better." Pearl tried to picture it and failed. "What changed?" "Reality. Teachers need college. College needs money. My family had neither. But being a deputy only required being willing to risk your life for $30 a month. That I could manage." "Do you regret it?" "Teaching?" "Sometimes, being a deputy?" He paused. "No. Turns out I'm better at this than I would have been at that. Even when it costs you everything? I haven't lost everything yet. Still got a house, a job, and a surprisingly sharp-tongued house guest who insults church ladies on my behalf." Pearl almost smiled. "That wasn't on your behalf. That was self-defense. Looked like both from where I'm standing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, Black Hollow settled into night. Horses being stabled, shops closing, families gathering for supper in homes where nobody questioned their right to be there. Normal life for normal people. Pearl wondered if she'd ever know what that felt like. "Tell me something true," Nathan said, echoing her earlier demand. Pearl hesitated. Truth was dangerous. Truth made you vulnerable. But sitting in this small house with a man who'd upended his life for a stranger, vulnerability felt less terrifying than it used to. "I'm afraid all the time. Every hour of every day. Been that way so long I don't remember what it feels like not to be scared." "Of what?" "Everything. Men, mostly. What they want, what they'll take. But also of being alone. Of having nothing. Of mattering to nobody." She looked at her hands. "I spent 6 years in that saloon teaching myself not to hope for anything because hope hurt worse than reality. But staying here, testifying against powerful men, believing maybe something could change. That's hope. And it terrifies me more than anything else has." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "You know what scares me?" "What?" "That we'll do all this. You'll testify. We'll expose the corruption. The marshals will make their arrests. And nothing will actually change. Different men will step into the same roles. The same rot will grow back under different names. And in 5 years, Black Hollow will be exactly what it is now, just with different victims." "Then why do it?" "Because the alternative is accepting that nothing matters and nobody can change anything. I'm not ready to believe that yet." "What happens when you are ready?" "I don't know. Probably become the kind of lawman I currently hate. Take bribes, look away, pretend the job is just a paycheck instead of a purpose." Pearl understood that trajectory intimately. "How long you think we've got before that happens? Before I become corrupt? Or before the town runs us both out?" "Either. Both." Nathan smiled slightly. "Depends how stubborn we are." "I'm pretty stubborn. I've noticed." The knock at the door interrupted them. Hard, aggressive, the kind of knock that came before trouble. Nathan rose slowly, hand instinctively checking the gun at his hip before he caught himself. Pearl stood too, every muscle tense. Nathan opened the door to Sheriff Briggs and 2 men Pearl didn't recognize, rough-looking, hired muscle rather than deputies. The sheriff's expression was cold. "Nathan, we need to talk." "Now?" "It's past 8. Now." Briggs pushed inside without invitation, his companions following. Pearl instinctively stepped back, calculating distances, exits, weapons. The men radiated menace the way some animals radiate warning. "What's this about?" Nathan's voice stayed level, but his posture shifted, became something harder. "It's about your continuing employment as a deputy of this county. There have been complaints, serious complaints about conduct unbecoming an officer of the law." "From who?" "Concerned citizens. Multiple concerned citizens. They feel you've compromised your position by housing a woman of questionable morals." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Miss Callahan's morals aren't anyone's business but her own. They became our business when you made them visible. You're representing the law, Nathan. You need to maintain certain standards." "Standards? That's interesting coming from you." Briggs' expression darkened. "Careful. Why? You planning to fire me for helping someone who had nowhere else to go? Do it. But we both know that'll look exactly like what it is. Retaliation because I helped the federal marshals expose the corruption you've been ignoring for years. I haven't been ignoring anything. You've been taking 30% of everything that moves through Blackwell's saloon. Don't insult me by denying it. The marshals have the books. The two men flanking Briggs shifted slightly, hands moving toward weapons. Pearl's breath caught. This could spiral into violence fast. One wrong word, one sudden move. But Nathan stood his ground. You came here to threaten me. Fine. Threat received. But I'm not firing Miss Callahan from a room she's renting, and I'm not backing down from helping with the federal investigation. You want to fire me? Talk to Marshal Coleman first. See how he feels about local officials obstructing justice. Briggs stared at him, rage and calculation warring on his face. Finally, he stepped back. You're making enemies, Deputy. Already had them. Just didn't realize it till recently. After they left, Nathan locked the door and sagged against it. His hands were shaking slightly. That was stupid, Pearl said quietly. You just declared war. War was already declared. I just stopped pretending we were at peace. They'll come after you now. After both of us. Probably. Nathan straightened. Which means we need to be ready. That night Pearl lay awake listening to the house settle around her, every creak a potential threat. She thought about the men flanking Briggs, about the cold promise in the sheriff's eyes, thought about Nathan standing between her and violence without flinching. Nobody had ever stood between her and violence before. She didn't know what to do with that. Morning came gray and cold, promising rain. Pearl woke to find Nathan already up, cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table. He looked up when she emerged. Today's the day. Marshal Coleman wants your deposition at 10. I'm ready. Pearl? He set the rifle aside. Once you do this, there's no taking it back. They'll know you cooperated. They'll know you're the reason their network's falling apart. I know. Just making sure. They walked to the federal marshal's office together through streets that felt hostile. People stared. Some crossed themselves like Pearl carried contagion. A child threw a rock that clattered off the boardwalk near her feet. Nathan kept walking like none of it touched him, but Pearl saw the tension in his shoulders. Marshal Coleman's office was cramped and official, smelling of ink and old paper. He stood when they entered, gestured to chairs. Miss Callahan, Deputy Crow, thank you for coming. Let's get this over with, Pearl said. The deposition took 4 hours. Coleman asked questions, a clerk recorded her answers, and Pearl told every truth she'd swallowed over 6 years. Names, dates, transactions, who paid who, which officials signed which false documents, how the land theft scheme worked from start to finish. She answered steadily, voice never wavering, until her throat was raw and her memory scraped clean. When it was finished, Coleman set down his pen. That'll do it. We'll need you for the formal hearing next month, but this gives us enough to proceed with arrests. Arrests. The word felt heavy. Final. Councilman Verner, Judge Haskins, Sheriff Briggs, and Samuel Blackwell will all be charged with conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and corruption. Additional charges pending further investigation. Coleman looked at her directly. This is because of you. You know that. Will it stick, the charges? With your testimony and the seized documents? Yes. I believe it will. Pearl nodded slowly. She'd just destroyed 4 powerful men, made herself the target of anyone loyal to them, anyone who profited from their crimes, anyone who preferred the old corrupt order to uncertain justice. She'd also just made 6 years of silence mean something. They left the marshal's office to find a crowd waiting. Not violent, but close. Angry faces, muttered threats. Someone shouted something about whores and traitors. Nathan took Pearl's arm, steady pressure, and they walked through it together. Nobody touched them, but the hatred was physical as fists. Halfway home, Pearl started shaking. Delayed reaction, shock catching up to decision. Nathan guided her to a bench outside the shuttered mercantile. Breathe, just breathe. I just ended 4 men's lives. No, you just held them accountable for their crimes. There's a difference. Is there? Because right now it feels like I'm the villain. To them, maybe. But to the families who lost land, to people like Sykes who got driven out, you're the reason they might get justice. Nathan crouched in front of her, met her eyes. I know it doesn't feel like it now. I know it feels like you just painted a target on your back. But what you did in there mattered. Pearl wanted to believe him, wanted to feel righteous or vindicated or at least certain. Instead, she just felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that went deeper than physical danger. What happens now? Now we go home, lock the doors, wait for the arrest to happen, and we get through whatever comes next. Together? Nathan stood, offered his hand. Together. Pearl took it. His grip was calloused and steady, and for one moment felt like the only solid thing in a world that had stopped making sense. They walked the rest of the way home, while Black Hollow watched them with judgmental eyes and darkening intentions. Two people who'd declared war on corruption without armor or backup or any guarantee they'd survive what came next. But they walked together, and somehow that made all the difference. The arrests happened at dawn 3 days later, coordinated and brutal in their efficiency. Pearl heard the commotion from Nathan's kitchen where she was making coffee, shouting, "Horses!" the distinct sound of men being dragged from their homes in nightclothes and dignity. She moved to the window. Federal marshals were everywhere, badges gleaming in the early light, rifles held ready for resistance that never came. Nathan appeared beside her, already dressed, gun belt buckled. "Stay inside. Lock the door behind me." "Where are you going?" "To make sure this doesn't turn into a bloodbath. Werner's got a hot temper and Briggs won't go quietly." But he was wrong about Briggs. The sheriff went very quietly indeed, hands up, face expressionless, as they stripped his badge and put him in irons. Pearl watched from the window as they led him past Nathan's house deliberately, making sure she saw. Briggs looked straight at her, and the promise in his eyes was colder than any threat he could have spoken. Councilman Werner fought. It took 3 marshals to subdue him, his wife screaming from their porch about justice and persecution, and how dare they treat a respected official like a common criminal. Judge Haskins tried to run and made it half a block before they tackled him in the street. Samuel Blackwell went pale and vomited on his own boots when they read the charges. By noon, all 4 men were locked in the county jail under federal guard, and Black Hollow was a town in shock. Pearl spent the day waiting for retaliation that didn't come. No rocks through windows, no midnight fires, no hired thugs kicking down doors, just silence. Heavy, oppressive silence that felt more threatening than violence. Nathan returned after sunset looking exhausted. "It's done. They're all in custody. Formal hearing set for 2 weeks from now." "And then?" "Then they stand trial. If convicted, when convicted, they'll serve federal prison time. The corruption network collapses." "At least that's the theory." Pearl handed him coffee. "You don't sound convinced." "I've seen corrupt systems before. They're like weeds. Pull out the visible ones and the roots stay hidden, waiting to grow back." He sank into a chair. "But maybe this time it'll be different." "You need to stop saying maybe." "What should I say instead?" "Something you actually believe." Nathan looked at her over the rim of his cup. "I believe we did the right thing. I believe those men deserved what happened to them. And I believe we're both going to pay a price for it that we can't predict yet." "That's cheerful." "You wanted honesty." Pearl sat across from him, suddenly tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. "What happens now? To us, I mean. The arrests are done. The testimony's given. What's the next chapter of this disaster? You stay here until the hearing. After that depends on what the marshals decide about witness protection." "And you?" "I keep doing my job. Hope the town doesn't lynch me before the federal government decides whether I'm a hero or a traitor." "Which do you think you are?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I think I'm a man who made a choice and has to live with the consequences, same as you." The consequences arrived the next morning in the form of Mayor Whitmore and 3 town councilmen who'd somehow avoided federal scrutiny. They stood on Nathan's porch looking grim and official, demanding entry like they had legal right to it. Nathan made them wait on the porch while he spoke to Pearl quietly inside. "They're going to pressure me to resign. Make it easier on everyone, they'll say. Let things settle down." "Are you going to?" "No, but they'll make threats. I need you to stay in your room, stay quiet, don't give them ammunition." "I've been giving people ammunition my whole life. I'm good at it." Despite the tension, Nathan almost smiled. "I know, that's what worries me." Pearl retreated to her room but left the door cracked. She could hear every word. "Deputy Crow." Mayor Whitmore's voice carried the weight of presumed authority. "I'll be direct. Your continued employment has become untenable. The federal arrests have thrown this town into chaos. People are scared, angry, confused. They need stability, not reminders of the turmoil you helped create. I helped expose criminals. That's my job. Your job is to maintain order. Instead, you've destroyed it. Order built on corruption isn't order. It's oppression with better manners. Councilman Porter cleared his throat. We're not here to debate philosophy. We're here to inform you that the town council has voted to request your resignation effective immediately. Request or demand? Does it matter? It matters if you're pretending this is voluntary. Nathan. A new voice. Councilman Davies, who Pearl recognized from the saloon days as a man who drank too much and talked too freely. Be reasonable. You're young, capable. This doesn't have to end your career in law enforcement. Resign gracefully, move to another county, start fresh. But staying here? You're poisoned now. The town won't forgive you for what you've done. I haven't done anything that needs forgiving. You've housed a prostitute under your roof. She's not a prostitute. She was a saloon worker who lost her job in her home. Semantics. The town sees her as fallen, sees you as the fool protecting her. Your credibility is gone. Your authority is gone. All you have left is stubbornness, and that won't keep you employed. Nathan's voice stayed level, but Pearl heard the steel underneath. The federal marshals assigned me to this case specifically. I'm their local liaison. You fire me, you're interfering with a federal investigation. Talk to Marshal Coleman about how that'll go. Mayor Whitmore sighed. We're trying to help you avoid a bigger mistake. Miss Callahan testified against powerful families. Those families have friends, relatives, business partners, people who feel loyalty to the arrested men. Some of those people are dangerous. If something happens to her while she's under your protection, that blood's on your hands. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You can't protect her forever. Eventually, the federal marshals will leave, the hearing will end, and you'll be alone here with everyone who wants revenge. How long you think you'll last? Long as I have to. There was a pause. Then Porter spoke again, voice harder. You're making this personal when it's business. The town needs to move forward. That means cutting loose the people who represent the old problems. You and Miss Callahan are those people now, whether you like it or not. Then I guess I don't like it. You're a fool, Nathan. Been called worse. They left in a storm of frustration and veiled threats. Nathan stood at the closed door for a long moment before Pearl emerged from her room. You should have taken the out, she said quietly. What out? Resign, leave town, start over somewhere they don't know your face. That's an out. Maybe the only one you'll get. I'm not leaving. Why? Pride? Principle? What's worth destroying your life over? Nathan turned to face her. You want the truth? I'm tired. Tired of running, tired of compromising, tired of watching bad men win because good people are too scared or too practical to fight back. I spent 3 years drifting from town to town, thinking maybe the next place would be different. It never was. So yeah, maybe this is pride or stupidity or both. But I'm done running. Pearl understood that exhaustion. She'd felt it herself in that saloon, night after night, year after year, watching her life narrow into survival and nothing more. You know what happens to people who stop running? They get caught. Maybe. Or maybe they finally stand their ground and discover they're stronger than they thought. That's optimism talking. Optimism gets people killed. So does pessimism. Just slower and sadder. Pearl wanted to argue but couldn't find the angle. Nathan was right and wrong in equal measure, and she was too tired to untangle which was which. Instead, she moved to the kitchen, started pulling out ingredients for supper. Cooking was mechanical, safe, something to do with her hands while her mind spun circles. Nathan joined her, peeling potatoes without being asked. They worked in silence for a while. The kind of comfortable quiet that comes when two people have run out of words, but don't mind the shared space. I read your sister's letters, Pearl said abruptly. The ones in the box on the shelf. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have, but I did. Nathan's hand stilled. When? A few days ago, before everything exploded. What did you think? I thought she sounded like every girl I knew at Blackwell's. Started hopeful, ended desperate. Never quite admitted how bad it had gotten. Pearl set down the knife. I'm not her, you know. I'm not Mary Crow reincarnated, so you can save her this time around. I know that. Do you? Because sometimes when you look at me, I can't tell if you're seeing me or seeing her ghost. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Maybe both. Is that fair to you? No, but I can't separate the two completely. Every time I see you, I remember what I couldn't do for Mary. Every time I help you, I feel like maybe I'm making up for failing her. That's selfish. I know it is, but it's honest. Pearl absorbed this. At least you admit it. Would you rather I lied? No, I've had enough of men lying. Your honesty is, she searched for the word, uncomfortable, but better than the alternative. I'll take uncomfortable. They finished cooking in renewed silence, ate supper while darkness gathered outside, and settled into another evening of waiting for the next crisis. It came sooner than expected. The knock on the door was soft, almost apologetic. Nathan answered it to find Lily standing on the porch, looking scared and defiant in equal measure. Pearl recognized her immediately, one of the other girls from Blackwell's, younger than Pearl, less hardened by the years. I need to talk to Pearl, please. Nathan glanced back at Pearl, who nodded. He stepped aside and Lily entered, clutching a shawl around her shoulders like armor. What happened? Pearl asked. They came to my boarding house tonight. 3 men I didn't recognize. Said they had a message for you, but knew you were hiding here and wouldn't come to the door. Lily's hands shook. They said to tell you that testifying was a mistake, that some mistakes can't be undone, but they can be made worse, and that you should think carefully about whether you want to make things worse. Did they threaten you? Not directly, but the way they looked at me. Lily swallowed hard. Pearl, I'm scared. For you, for me, for anyone who is associated with that saloon. These men, they're serious. This isn't just talk. Nathan had been listening from the doorway. Now he moved into the room, expression grim. Did you recognize any of them? Voices? Faces? Anything? No, but they moved like ranch hands, working men, not gentlemen playing tough. Hired muscle, probably brought in from outside the county so nobody can identify them. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. This is escalating faster than I expected. What do I do? Lily looked between them, desperate. I can't afford to leave town. I've got nothing saved, nowhere to go. But staying here feels like waiting to be next. Pearl moved to the younger woman, took her hands. Listen to me. You didn't testify. You didn't give depositions. You're not the target. They're just using you to scare me. And if they decide to do more than scare? Then we deal with it. Nathan's voice was firm. Where are you staying? Riverside Boarding House, Mrs. Chen's place. That's halfway across town with no law presence. You should stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk to Marshal Coleman about protection. Lily looked stunned. You'd let me stay? After all the talk about Pearl being here already? 1 scandal or 2. Doesn't matter much at this point. Nathan was already pulling out blankets. You'll take the sofa. It's not comfortable, but it's safer than being alone tonight. Pearl felt something shift in her chest, watching Nathan offer shelter to another woman who needed it. Another ghost from places like where Mary had died. He wasn't just saving Pearl anymore. He was waging war against every circumstance that pushed women into corners and called it their own fault. That night, 3 people slept in a house meant for 1, and Pearl lay awake listening to Lily's nervous breathing from the main room. She thought about the men who delivered their message, about the careful escalation of threats. They were testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push before someone broke. Pearl had been broken before. By poverty, by necessity, by 6 years in a saloon where every smile cost her something she couldn't get back. But this was different. This time, she had something worth protecting beyond just her own survival. She had proof that speaking up mattered. She had Nathan's stubborn refusal to back down. She had Lily seeking safety in the only place that offered it. She had chosen to be visible, and visibility was its own kind of armor. Morning brought Marshal Coleman to their door before breakfast, looking official and concerned. He declined coffee but accepted a chair, his presence filling the small kitchen. We've had reports of intimidation attempts. The boarding house incident last night, but also others. Someone tried to burn down the print shop after they ran a piece supporting the arrests. A homesteader who was planning to testify about his stolen land found his barn door painted with a warning. This is coordinated retaliation. Can you stop it? Nathan asked. I can increase patrols, station guards at key locations, but I've got 6 marshals total to cover the entire county. We're stretched thin. What about witness protection for Pearl? That's why I'm here. Coleman turned to Pearl. We can relocate you before the hearing. New town, new identity, enough funds to start over. You'd be safe. And the hearing? We'd bring you back under guard for testimony, then relocate you again immediately after. Pearl felt the offer's weight, safety, distance, a chance to stop looking over her shoulder every hour of every day. All she had to do was disappear. What about Lily and anyone else they might target to get to me? Coleman hesitated. We can't protect everyone. Then I'm not interested. Pearl? Nathan started. No, I'm not running while other people pay the price for my testimony. That's not how this works. That's exactly how witness protection works, Coleman said. We secure the primary witness. We can't guarantee the safety of every peripheral person who might be caught in the fallout. Then your system is broken. Pearl leaned forward. These men, the ones who hired the muscle to threaten us, they're not stupid. They know I testified. They know I'm the key to the prosecution. But they also know that killing me outright brings federal heat they can't handle. So instead, they'll hurt people around me, make examples, create so much fear that no one dares speak against corruption ever again. And if I run, I prove them right. I prove that speaking up isn't worth the cost. You also stay alive. To what end? So I can live in some other town knowing I left people here to burn for helping me? Pearl shook her head. I've spent 6 years choosing survival over principle. I'm done with that. I'm staying. Coleman looked at Nathan. You gonna talk sense into her? She's making sense, just not the kind you want to hear. You're both insane, you understand that? We've been told. Nathan refilled his coffee cup. So what can you do to help us survive our insanity? Coleman sighed. I can station a marshal here at night. I can increase patrols on this street. I can assign deputies to escort you to and from necessary locations. But Nathan, you're spreading my resources thin. If something happens in another part of the county, I might not be able to respond fast enough. Understood. And Miss Callahan, if you insist on staying, you need to be smart. Stay inside as much as possible. Don't go anywhere alone. Trust no one outside of verified law enforcement. These people play for keeps. I've noticed. After Coleman left, Lily emerged from the bedroom where she'd been hiding during the conversation. Her eyes were wide. You're really staying, even after everything? I'm really staying. Why? Pearl thought about all the reasons she could give. Principle, stubbornness, revenge. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. Because if I run now, everything I've been through means nothing. The 6 years at Blackwell's, the testimony, the judgment, it all becomes just more trauma in a life full of trauma. But if I stay, if I see this through, then maybe it means something. Maybe I become more than just a survivor. Maybe I become someone who fought back. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she straightened her shoulders. I want to testify too. Nathan and Pearl both stared at her. You what? Pearl said. I want to testify. I saw things too. Not as much as you, but enough. I heard Judge Haskins brag about fixing a trial. I watched Councilman Werner discuss land deals he was stealing. If you need more testimony to make the case stronger, I can provide it. Lily, you don't have to. Oh, I know I don't have to, but you're right. Running doesn't fix anything. It just means we lose and they win again. I'm tired of them winning. Pearl looked at this young woman who'd worked beside her in that saloon, who'd endured the same degradation and survived the same way, by staying small, staying quiet, staying invisible. And now here she was, choosing visibility, choosing risk, choosing to matter. Okay, Pearl said. Okay, let's go talk to Coleman. The next week passed in a strange, suspended tension. Marshal Coleman assigned a deputy to watch Nathan's house at night. Nathan continued making his rounds under the town's hostile stare. Pearl and Lily stayed mostly inside, but occasionally ventured out under escort to give additional testimony, to meet with the prosecutor building the case, to prove they weren't hiding in shame. The town's reaction was predictable. More whispers, more judgment. A rock through Nathan's window one night with a note tied to it that said simply, "Leave," but also something unexpected, quiet support from corners Pearl hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house showed up one afternoon with a basket of food. I heard you are feeding 2 women now on a deputy's salary. This should help. A farmer named Hendricks stopped Nathan on the street to shake his hand. My brother lost his land 3 years ago to Werner's schemes. Nobody would listen to him. Thank you for listening to her. Even some of the women who'd previously condemned Pearl began to soften. Not all. Not even most. But enough that Pearl realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just the fallen woman anymore. She was the woman who'd spoken up when everyone else stayed silent. One evening, sitting at supper with Nathan and Lily, Pearl felt something unexpected and uncomfortable bloom in her chest. It took her a moment to identify it. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of someone drowning and grabbing for anything that floats, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who's found solid ground and is learning to trust it. You're smiling, Nathan observed. Am I? First time I've seen it. Looks good on you. Pearl felt her face heat. Don't get used to it. This whole situation is still a disaster waiting to collapse. True. But we can enjoy the calm moments between disasters. Lily laughed. You two argue like an old married couple. You realize that? The comment hung in the air, awkward and charged. Pearl and Nathan carefully avoided looking at each other. But later, after Lily had gone to bed and they were cleaning up the supper dishes, Nathan spoke quietly. I need to tell you something. Pearl's stomach tightened. That sounds ominous. It's not. Or maybe it is. I don't know. He set down the dish he was drying. The thing is, having you here, it's complicated things for me. I know. Your reputation, your job, the whole town judging, that's not what I mean. Nathan met her eyes. I mean you. Specifically. You've complicated things for me personally. Pearl felt the ground shift under her feet. Nathan, I'm not asking you for anything. I just need you to know. Because if something happens, if this situation goes bad and we don't get another chance to talk honestly, I need you to know that you matter to me. Not as a responsibility or a mission or a way to save my sister retroactively. As you. As Pearl. As the woman who's been living in my house and arguing with church ladies and making my coffee too strong every morning. The coffee's not too strong. It's extremely too strong. Despite the tension, Pearl almost smiled. You could make it yourself. I could, but then I'd miss watching you make it while pretending you're not nervous about the day ahead. I don't pretend that. You do. You get this little line between your eyebrows and you pour the grounds heavier than necessary. It's how I know what kind of day it's going to be before you even speak. Pearl didn't know what to do with this information. Didn't know what to do with Nathan Crow standing in his kitchen, telling her she mattered, looking at her like she was something more than a woman who'd survived 6 years in a saloon. I don't know what you want me to say. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. But Pearl found herself speaking anyway. My whole life, men have wanted things from me. My work, my body, my silence, my compliance. You're the first man who's offered me things instead. Safety, shelter, protection. No price tag attached. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to trust it. You don't have to trust it yet. Just don't dismiss it completely. Even if I wanted to trust it, what's the point? When this hearing ends, when the trial's over, I'll have to leave anyway. Witness protection, new identity, different life. That's the only way I survive this. Maybe. Or maybe we figure out a different way. There is no different way. You heard Coleman. The families I testified against, they'll never stop looking for revenge. Staying here is suicide. Then we'll make it not suicide. We'll make it something else. Pearl laughed, bitter and tired. You can't just decide reality into something different. Watch me. The certainty in his voice was maddening and compelling in equal measure. Pearl wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that speaking up could lead to something other than running or dying. But belief required hope, and hope required trust. And trust was the most expensive currency she'd ever traded in. Before she could respond, the window shattered. Glass exploded inward. Nathan tackled Pearl to the floor as something heavy crashed onto the kitchen table. Not a rock this time. Something else. Something that hissed and sparked. And, "Fire!" Lily screamed from the other room. The bottle was crude but effective. Oil, a lit rag, basic accelerant. Flames licked across the table toward the curtains. Nathan was already moving, grabbing the water bucket, throwing it on the fire. Pearl scrambled for more water. Lily appeared with blankets, beating at the flames that had caught the curtains. Together, they killed the fire before it spread beyond the kitchen. But the message was clear. The broken window, the burning bottle, the timing, all of it said that patience was ending. Threats were escalating into action. Nathan stood in his destroyed kitchen, breathing hard, face streaked with soot. The deputy stationed outside burst through the door, gun drawn, too late to prevent the attack, but ready for whatever came next. "Everyone all right?" "We're fine," Nathan said, voice hard. "But we're done playing defense. Tomorrow we find out who's coordinating these attacks, and we end this." Pearl looked at him, at this stubborn deputy who'd upended his life for a stranger, who'd chosen principle over practicality, who stood in his burned kitchen promising to fight back against forces that had crushed bigger men than him. And for the first time in 6 years, Pearl Callahan let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, fighting back wasn't suicide. Maybe it was survival. Just a different kind than she'd learned before. They spent what remained of the night cleaning up shattered glass and smoke damage, while the deputy stood guard and Marshal Coleman arrived to document the attack. Pearl's hands shook as she swept, adrenaline refusing to fade. Lily sat at the scorched table looking pale and determined, her earlier bravery tested by fire, and holding firm. Nathan moved through the ruined kitchen with cold efficiency, cataloging damage, answering Coleman's questions, already planning their next move. "This changes things," Coleman said, examining the crude firebomb's remains. "This isn't intimidation anymore. This is attempted murder." "Attempted and failed," Nathan's voice was flat. "Which means they'll try again, probably harder." "I can move all 3 of you to protective custody tonight." "Kiki." "No." Pearl stood from her sweeping back straight despite exhaustion. "We've had this conversation. Moving us doesn't solve the problem. It just relocates it and proves they can control us through fear." Coleman looked at Nathan. "You agree with this insanity?" "I agree that running now means losing everything we've fought for." Nathan set down the broken bottle carefully. "These people, whoever hired them, they're getting desperate. Desperate means sloppy. Sloppy means they'll make mistakes. We need to use that." "Use it how?" "Find out who hired them. Follow the money, the connections, the whispers. Someone in this town knows who's coordinating the attacks. We find that person, we end this before the hearing even starts. That's investigation work that could take weeks. Then we'd better start now." Coleman left an hour before dawn, promising additional security and investigation support that Nathan clearly didn't believe would arrive. The remaining deputies stayed posted outside, looking young and nervous. Pearl wondered if he'd signed up for law enforcement expecting to face down corruption and assassination attempts, or if he just wanted steady pay and a badge. When morning finally came gray and cold, none of them had slept. Lily made coffee that was somehow worse than Pearl's while Nathan boarded up the broken window. Pearl sat at the damaged table and felt the weight of consequences settling over her shoulders like a cloak made of lead. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Nathan looked up from hammering. "For what?" "For this. All of this. If I hadn't told you about the corruption, if I just stayed silent like I had for 6 years, none of this would be happening. Your house wouldn't be damaged, Lily wouldn't be in danger, you wouldn't be a target." "Stop." Nathan set down the hammer. "You didn't do this. Corrupt men covering their crimes did this. You just had the courage to expose it." "Courage? That's a generous word for desperation." "Is there a difference?" Pearl thought about that. "I don't know anymore. I used to think courage meant not being afraid. Now I think maybe it just means being afraid and doing it anyway." "That's exactly what it means." Lily brought them coffee in silence. They sat together in the damaged kitchen as dawn light filtered through the boarded window, 3 people who'd become accidental allies against forces bigger than any of them alone. Pearl studied Nathan's face, exhaustion etched deep, jaw tight with determination, eyes that still held something she was afraid to name. He caught her looking, and something passed between them that had no words attached to it. "We should talk about what comes after," Lily said abruptly. "After what?" Nathan asked. "After the hearing, after the trial, after we've testified and the guilty men are sentenced and the federal marshals leave." Lily wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "What happens to us then?" Nobody answered immediately because nobody had good answers. Finally, Pearl spoke. "We survive. Same as always." "But how? The people who hate us now will still hate us. The danger doesn't disappear just because men are in prison. Their families remain, their business partners, everyone who profited from the corruption we exposed. Then we leave, Nathan said. All three of us, if necessary. Start over somewhere the names Werner and Haskins and Briggs don't carry weight. You'd leave Black Hollow? After everything? After everything, there might not be a Black Hollow worth staying in. Nathan stood, moved to the window. I became a lawman to uphold justice. If I can't do that here, I'll do it somewhere else. Pearl felt something shift in her understanding. Nathan wasn't just protecting her out of principle or guilt. He was protecting the idea that law could mean something beyond power and money. That justice could exist for people without influence, and he was willing to burn his whole life down to defend that idea. You're an idealist, she said. Is that an insult? It's an observation. Idealists usually end up dead or disappointed. Then I'll try for disappointed. It's got better odds. Despite everything, Pearl almost smiled. But the moment broke when someone knocked on the door, tentative, nervous. Nathan's hand went to his gun before he caught himself. The deputy outside called through the boards. Got a visitor. Says she's a friend. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house. Nathan opened the door carefully. Mrs. Chen stood on the porch looking uncomfortable and determined, carrying another basket of food. I heard about last night. The whole town heard. She thrust the basket at Nathan. Brought supplies. And information if you want it. What kind of information? Nathan asked. The kind that might get me in trouble for sharing. Mrs. Chen glanced at the deputy, then back at Nathan. Can we talk inside? They moved to the main room, away from the deputy's ears. Mrs. Chen sat on the edge of the sofa like she might need to run at any moment. Pearl poured her tea she clearly didn't want but accepted anyway. I run a boarding house, Mrs. Chen started. 20 rooms, constant turnover. I see people. I hear things. Most of it's not my business, so I stay quiet. But last night changed something. What did you hear? Nathan leaned forward. 3 men took rooms at my place 4 days ago. Paid cash, gave false names, said they were ranch hands looking for work. But ranch hands don't carry that kind of money. Ranch hands don't have hands that soft. These were hired men pretending to be working men. Did you recognize them? No. But I recognized who they met with. 2 nights ago, Councilman Werner's son came to my boarding house after dark. Went straight to their room. I heard voices but couldn't make out words. He left an hour later looking satisfied with himself. Pearl's stomach tightened. Werner's son, James? The same. And before you ask, yes, I'm sure it was him. I've known that boy since he was knee-high and causing trouble. He's grown into exactly the kind of man his father is. Will you testify to this? Nathan asked. Mrs. Chen went pale. If I testify, I lose my business. Werner's family will make sure of it. They'll spread rumors, drive away customers, maybe burn the place down like they tried with you. I have employees depending on that income. I can't risk it. Then why tell us at all? Because you need to know who you're dealing with. James Werner isn't some hired thug. He's smart, connected, and angry that his father's in federal custody. He's the one coordinating the attacks. If you want to stop this, you stop him. After Mrs. Chen left, the 3 of them sat in heavy silence. Nathan paced the length of the room 3 times before speaking. James Werner, 26 years old, works for his father's land company, stands to inherit everything if the prosecution fails. He's got motivation and resources. And no evidence connecting him to the attacks, Pearl added. Mrs. Chen won't testify. The hired men won't talk. We know he's guilty, but we can't prove it. Then we make him prove it himself. Nathan stopped pacing. We set a trap. What kind of trap? The kind where he thinks he's won, where he gets confident enough to make mistakes. Lily looked between them, nervous. That sounds dangerous. Everything we're doing is dangerous. At least this way we're driving the danger instead of waiting for it to hit us. Nathan turned to Pearl. The hearing is in 3 days. James knows you'll testify. He knows your testimony will help convict his father. He's running out of time to stop you, so we give him an opportunity he can't resist. What opportunity? You, alone, vulnerable. Pearl's blood went cold. You want to use me as bait. I want to give him a target. He'll move on himself instead of through hired men. If he takes the bait, we catch him in the act, and we've got evidence that connects directly to him. And if he doesn't take the bait, if he just sends more men with more firebombs, then we adapt. But I think his ego won't let him delegate this anymore. He tried hired muscle, and it failed. He'll want to finish this personally. Pearl wanted to say no, wanted to refuse to be used as bait in some desperate gamble that could get her killed. But the alternative was waiting in this house for the next attack, hoping the boarded window and single deputy would be enough protection. At least Nathan's plan was active. At least it gave them some control over timing and circumstances. "Tell me the plan," she said. They spent the day preparing. Nathan sent word through carefully selected channels that Pearl would be visiting the federal marshal's office alone the next evening to review her testimony before the hearing. He made it seem like a mistake, like someone had forgotten to arrange an escort, like she'd be vulnerable for exactly 2 blocks, walking from Nathan's house to the office. Then they waited to see if James Verner would hear the rumor and take the opportunity. Pearl tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Instead, she cleaned her revolver, a small gun Nathan had given her days ago that she'd barely knew how to use, and practiced the route in her mind. 2 blocks. Nathan and Coleman's deputies would be watching from hiding, ready to intervene if James made his move. She just had to walk calmly and look vulnerable. Looking vulnerable wasn't hard. She'd been doing it for years. That night, Pearl couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed listening to the house settle and wondering if tomorrow she'd be dead or alive or something in between. Wondering if testifying against corruption was worth gambling her life on one desperate plan. Wondering when she'd become someone brave enough or foolish enough to believe she could win against powerful men who crushed people like her for sport. She heard Nathan's door open, heard his footsteps pause outside her room. A soft knock. "You awake?" "Unfortunately." "Can I come in?" Pearl hesitated, then said yes. Nathan entered carrying a lamp, closed the door behind him. He sat on the edge of her bed, careful to maintain distance, and looked at her seriously. "You don't have to do this tomorrow. We can find another way." "There is no other way. You said it yourself. I was wrong. There's always another way. It just might take longer, or cost more, or be less satisfying. But I won't risk your life on a plan that's half strategy and half desperation." Pearl sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "You think I haven't been risking my life? I've been risking it since I was 16 and took work at that saloon because starvation seemed worse than degradation. I risked it every night serving whiskey to men who saw me as property. I risked it when I told you about the corruption. I risked it when I testified. My whole life is risk, Nathan. At least tomorrow I get to choose the risk instead of having it chosen for me. That doesn't make me feel better about it." "It's not supposed to. It's just true." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "If something happens to you tomorrow, if this plan fails and you get hurt or worse, I won't forgive myself. You should know that." "Why? It's not your forgiveness that matters." "Then whose does?" Pearl thought about that. "Mine, I suppose. And I forgave myself a long time ago for doing whatever I needed to survive. If tomorrow's what I need to survive, then I'll do it and forgive myself later." "You're braver than I am." "No, I'm just more used to being afraid. You still think courage is noble. I know it's just necessity with better posture." Despite the tension, Nathan almost smiled. "That's the most cynical thing I've ever heard. I've earned my cynicism." "I know. That's what makes it honest." He stood to leave, then paused. "Pearl, when this is over, the hearing, the trial, all of it, I need you to know you've got options. You don't have to disappear into witness protection. You don't have to run to some town where nobody knows your name. If you want to stay, if you want to build something here or somewhere else, I'll help make it happen." "Why would I stay? The town hates me." "Some of the town hates you. Others are starting to see what you really are." "And what's that?" "Brave. Honest. Someone who stood up when standing up was dangerous. That matters to more people than you think." Pearl didn't know what to do with that assessment, didn't know how to reconcile it with her understanding of herself as a woman who'd survived by staying small and quiet. "You see someone I don't recognize when you look at me. Maybe you should look closer." After he left, Pearl lay awake for hours, turning his words over in her mind. She'd spent 6 years telling herself she was just surviving, that survival was enough, that hoping for anything more was foolish. But Nathan kept suggesting that survival could transform into living if she let it, that the woman who'd testified against corruption wasn't the same woman who'd poured whiskey in silence for 6 years, that maybe she'd changed without noticing. The thought was terrifying and compelling in equal measure. Morning arrived too quickly. Pearl dressed carefully. Nothing fancy, just her usual clothes. But she took time with her hair and made sure the small revolver was hidden, but accessible in her coat pocket. Nathan watched her preparations with obvious anxiety. Last chance to change your mind. Not changing it. You're sure you can do this? Pearl met his eyes. No, but I'm doing it anyway. The plan was simple in theory. Pearl would leave at 5 in the evening when the streets were busy enough to provide cover, but empty enough that James could make his move without too many witnesses. She'd walk slowly, giving him time to approach. Nathan and 2 of Coleman's deputies would be watching from concealed positions, ready to intervene the moment James revealed his intentions. If everything went right, they'd catch him in the act and have concrete evidence connecting him to the attacks. If everything went wrong, Pearl would be dead before Nathan could reach her. She tried not to think about that possibility as the day crawled toward 5 o'clock. Lily hugged her before she left. Be careful, be smart, and if something feels wrong, run. Don't be brave, just run. I'll try. Pearl. Lily's grip tightened. Thank you for doing this, for being the kind of person who fights back. I never knew that was possible until I met you. Pearl pulled away before the emotion could overwhelm her. Save the gratitude for after I survive this. Nathan walked her to the door. The street outside was quiet, normal, showing no signs of the trap they'd set. He checked her revolver one more time, made sure it was loaded and accessible, then met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. 2 blocks. That's all. You walk steady, you stay alert. And if anything feels wrong, you signal and we move in immediately. I know the plan. I'm saying it again because I need to hear myself say it. Because if something happens, nothing's going to happen. Pearl? She kissed him. Brief, impulsive, terrifying. His lips were warm and surprised, and then she was pulling back, stepping away, moving toward the door before she could second-guess the impulse. That's for luck, she said, voice steadier than she felt. Don't waste it by getting yourself killed trying to save me. Then she was outside, door closing behind her, committed to the plan with no room for retreat. The street looked normal. Women returning from market, men heading to supper, the ordinary rhythm of a frontier town at day's end. Pearl started walking, every sense alert, hand near her pocket where the revolver waited. She felt Nathan's eyes on her from wherever he was hiding, felt the weight of the trap they'd set and the dangers it invited. Half a block. Nothing happened. The evening air was cold, carrying the smell of wood smoke and horse. Pearl's heart hammered, but she kept her pace steady, her expression calm. Just a woman walking to an appointment. Nothing threatening, nothing worth noticing. 1 block. Still nothing. Maybe James hadn't heard the rumor. Maybe he'd decided the risk wasn't worth taking. Maybe this whole plan was built on wishful thinking and desperation, and she was walking toward the marshal's office for nothing. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Quick, purposeful, not trying to be subtle. Pearl's hand moved toward her pocket but stopped. Not yet. She needed him to commit. Needed to be sure before she drew the gun and turned this from setup to confrontation. Miss Callahan. She turned. James Verner stood 10 feet behind her, well-dressed, well-groomed, looking nothing like a man about to commit murder. But his eyes held something cold and determined that made Pearl's stomach drop. Mr. Verner, I didn't expect to see you. I imagine not. Taking a walk alone at this hour seems unwise given recent events. He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. Almost like you're asking for trouble. I have an appointment at the marshal's office. Yes, I heard about that. Funny how word spreads in a small town. James took a step closer. Pearl's hand drifted toward her pocket again, but he noticed, raised his hands in mock innocence. I'm not here to hurt you, Miss Callahan, just to talk. We have nothing to talk about. I disagree. I think we have quite a lot to discuss. For instance, your upcoming testimony against my father. Your insistence on destroying respected families over a few business disagreements. Your stubborn refusal to accept very generous offers to leave town and start fresh elsewhere. Those weren't offers, they were threats. Semantics, the point is, you've been given chances to avoid this confrontation and you've rejected them all. That strikes me as poor decision-making. Pearl felt the weight of the revolver in her pocket, felt Nathan watching from somewhere nearby. felt the trap closing around James Verner if she could just keep him talking long enough to reveal his intentions clearly. Your father is guilty of fraud, corruption, and systematic theft. My testimony will help prove that. If that destroys your family's reputation, maybe your family shouldn't have built that reputation on crime. James's smile vanished. You sanctimonious little whore. You think because you've convinced some federal marshal to listen to you that you're suddenly righteous? You're the same woman who served drinks and spread her legs for 6 years in that saloon. Nothing you say changes what you are. And what's that? Disposable. Irrelevant. A problem that can be solved with the right application of force. There it was. The threat made explicit. Pearl's hand closed around the revolver grip. Is that what you tell the men you hire? That I'm a problem needing force? I have no idea what you mean. The 3 men staying at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The ones you met with 2 nights ago. The ones who threw a firebomb through a window. Those men. James's expression shifted, became something harder. You're making accusations you can't prove. Actually, I can, because you've been sloppy, Mr. Verner. Angry men usually are. You left witnesses, left trails, left evidence, and you're about to make your biggest mistake yet. What mistake is that? Thinking I'm alone. Nathan stepped out from the alley beside them, gun drawn, expression cold. 2 deputies emerged from other positions, rifles ready. James froze, realizing too late that he'd walked into a trap. James Verner, Nathan said formally, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted arson, and intimidation of federal witnesses. You have no proof. We have your own words. Miss Callahan was wearing a wire. Everything you just said was recorded. Nathan gestured and Pearl pulled a small device from inside her coat, a recording cylinder one of Coleman's deputies had rigged up. Experimental technology that might or might not hold up in court but didn't need to because James didn't know that. James's face went white, then red with rage. You lying bitch! He lunged at Pearl. The movement was fast, desperate, fueled by fury at being outmaneuvered. Pearl stumbled backward, hand finally pulling the revolver free, but James was already on her, grabbing for the gun, his weight knocking her into the dirt. Then Nathan was there. He hit James hard enough to send him sprawling, then dragged him up and slammed him against the nearest building. The deputies moved in with irons, securing James while he shouted threats and denials that nobody was listening to anymore. Pearl sat in the dirt, breathing hard, revolver still clutched in her shaking hand. Nathan helped her up gently, checked her for injuries she didn't have. You all right? Define all right. Despite the situation, he almost smiled. Fair point. Can you walk? Yes. Did it work? Did we get what we needed? We got him attacking you in front of 3 witnesses and admitting to hiring men for intimidation. Whether the recording device actually worked doesn't matter. His own actions just convicted him. Marshal Coleman appeared from around the corner where he'd been positioned with backup. He looked at the scene, James in irons, Pearl covered in dirt, Nathan standing between them like a wall, and shook his head. Craziest plan I've ever authorized, but it worked. What happens now? Pearl asked. Now James Verner joins his father in federal custody. Now we have evidence connecting the Verner family directly to witness intimidation. And now, Miss Callahan, you can testify at the hearing without worrying about firebombs or hired thugs. Pearl wanted to feel victorious. Instead, she just felt exhausted. Until someone else decides to take revenge. This doesn't end with James. No, Coleman admitted. But it makes the next person think twice. And sometimes that's the best we can do. They walked back to Nathan's house together while the deputies hauled James away. Word spread fast. By the time they reached the street, people were emerging from homes to watch, to whisper, to process that the deputy and the saloon girl had just caught Councilman Verner's son trying to commit murder in broad daylight. Some of the whispers were still hostile, but some carried something else. Respect, maybe, or at least recognition that Pearl Callahan was more than what they'd assumed. Inside, Lily was pacing frantically. She nearly collapsed with relief when they entered safely. I heard shouting, thought it had gone wrong, couldn't see from the window. It went right, Pearl interrupted. Strange as that sounds. They sat together in the main room as evening darkened into night. 3 people who'd survived another day through combination of planning and luck. Pearl's hands finally stopped shaking. Nathan made coffee nobody wanted, but everyone drank. Lily asked questions about the arrest, about what happened next, about whether they were finally safe. Nobody had good answers for that last one. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, Pearl and Nathan sat in comfortable silence. He'd rebuilt the fire, and it crackled softly in the hearth. Pearl watched the flames and thought about all the fires she'd survived, literal and metaphorical, the kind that destroyed and the kind that forged something stronger from the wreckage. "What you did today," Nathan said quietly, "that took more courage than I've seen in any lawman I've worked with. Or more stupidity. Sometimes those look the same from the outside." Pearl turned to look at him. "Why do you keep doing that?" "Doing what?" "Treating me like I'm brave or noble or something worth admiring. I'm just trying to survive, same as always." "No, you stopped just surviving weeks ago. Now you're fighting. There's a difference." Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and met her eyes. "Pearl, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "What?" "That kiss earlier, before you left. Was that just luck, or was it something else?" Pearl's breath caught. She'd been hoping he wouldn't bring it up, wouldn't force her to examine an impulse she barely understood herself. But Nathan Crow seemed determined to drag every truth into the light, even the uncomfortable ones. "I don't know what it was." "Try." "It was impulse, fear, wanting something to anchor me before I did something terrifying. And was I the anchor or just the nearest person?" Pearl thought about lying, thought about protecting herself by keeping the truth small and manageable. But she'd spent the day risking her life for honesty. Seemed wasteful to retreat into dishonesty now. "You were the anchor. Specifically you. Not just anyone." Nathan absorbed this quietly. "That complicates things." "I know, because I meant what I said last night. About you mattering to me. About wanting you to stay when this is over. But I don't want you to feel obligated or like you owe me anything for the shelter or the help, or I don't feel obligated." "Then what do you feel?" Pearl struggled for words that wouldn't be more honest than she could handle. "I feel like maybe for the first time in my life, I've met someone who sees me as something other than useful or disposable. I feel like you've made me believe that speaking up was worth the cost. And I feel terrified because everything good I've ever had got taken away, and believing I could keep this, keep you, feels like setting myself up for the worst loss yet." "What if you don't lose it? People like me always lose it." "That's not fate. That's history. And history can change." Pearl wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she could have something beyond survival, beyond the narrow life she'd carved out of necessity and fear. But belief required hope, and hope required vulnerability, and vulnerability was the most dangerous thing she'd ever attempted. "Ask me again after the hearing," she said finally. "After we know whether this testimony actually mattered, after we know if we're both still alive. Ask me then, and maybe I'll have a better answer." Nathan nodded slowly. "That's fair. But Pearl, whatever your answer is, know that mine won't change. I want you in my life, not as a responsibility or a mission or redemption for my sister, just as you, as Pearl, the woman who makes terrible coffee and insults church ladies and has more courage than she gives herself credit for." "The coffee's not terrible. It's legitimately undrinkable." Despite everything, Pearl laughed. "Then make it yourself." "Never. It's part of your charm." They sat in comfortable silence until the fire burned low and exhaustion finally outweighed anxiety. When Pearl stood to go to bed, Nathan caught her hand gently. "Thank you for today, for trusting me enough to walk into danger. Thank you for making sure I walked back out." In her narrow bed, Pearl lay awake thinking about courage and survival and the difference between the two. Thinking about Nathan Crow and the impossible future he kept suggesting was possible. Thinking about the hearing in 2 days where she'd testify against powerful men and pray that justice was real and not just another frontier myth. She thought about this kiss she'd given him. Impulsive, terrifying, honest. And the way he'd looked at her afterward like she was something precious instead of problematic. And slowly, carefully, Pearl let herself imagine a future where she didn't disappear into witness protection and forget her own name. A future where she stayed in Black Hollow or somewhere like it, where she built something real instead of just surviving day by day. The future terrified her more than any firebomb or hired thug ever could. But for the first time in 6 years, Pearl Callahan thought it might be worth the fear. The hearing convened on a Wednesday morning under skies so gray they seemed to press down on the courthouse itself. Pearl sat in the witness room with Lily and Nathan, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. Through the walls, she could hear the crowd gathering. More people than Black Hollow had seen assembled since the town's founding, all of them there to watch the spectacle of corruption exposed and powerful men held accountable, or to watch Pearl Callahan be discredited and destroyed, depending on whose side they'd chosen. "You ready?" Nathan asked quietly. "No, but that's never stopped me before." Lily squeezed her hand. "You've got this. You've survived worse than lawyers and questions." Pearl wasn't sure that was true. She'd survived men's violence, survived poverty, survived 6 years in a saloon that ground women down to nothing. But standing up in public, speaking truth to power, putting her name and face to testimony that would determine whether justice was real or just a story people told themselves, that was survival of a different kind entirely. Marshal Coleman appeared in the doorway. "They're ready for you, Miss Callahan." Pearl stood. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, but they carried her forward anyway, through the door, down the hall, into the courtroom packed with people whose judgment hit her like physical weight. She saw faces she recognized from the saloon, men who'd been kind, men who'd been cruel, men who'd treated her like furniture. Saw the families of the accused men, their hatred focused and absolute. Saw townspeople who'd condemned her, townspeople who'd started questioning their condemnation, townspeople who just wanted to see how this impossible situation resolved itself. And she saw Nathan standing against the back wall, steady as stone, his eyes meeting hers with something that looked like faith. The federal prosecutor was a stern woman named Margaret Wells, who'd traveled from Denver specifically for this case. She'd interviewed Pearl 3 times already, knew her testimony inside and out, had warned her that the defense would try to destroy her credibility through any means necessary. They'll attack your character, your morals, your motivations. They'll suggest you're lying for money or revenge or attention. You need to stay calm, answer honestly, and remember that the documents back up everything you're saying. Your testimony connects the dots. The paperwork proves the dots existed in the first place. Now Pearl sat in the witness chair, raised her hand, swore to tell the truth, and faced the courtroom full of people waiting to judge whether a saloon girl's word could topple men who'd ruled the county for decades. Margaret Wells approached with a reassuring nod. "Miss Callahan, how long did you work at Blackwell's Saloon?" 6 years, from the time I was 19 until the federal raid shut it down. "And during those 6 years, what were your duties?" "I served drinks primarily. Sometimes I helped with cleaning, with managing inventory, whatever needed doing." "Did you interact with customers?" "Every day. The saloon was busy most nights. I served dozens of men, listened to their conversations, brought them whiskey while they played cards or discussed business." "And some of that business was illegal, wasn't it?" Pearl glanced at the defense table where Councilman Verner, Judge Haskins, Sheriff Briggs, and Samuel Blackwell sat with their expensive lawyers. Verner stared at her with naked hatred. Briggs looked bored. Haskins seemed to have aged a decade in the weeks since his arrest. "Yes, I witnessed multiple instances of corruption, fraud and conspiracy." Margaret Wells walked her through it methodically. The land deals, the forged documents, the bribes paid to ensure legal decisions went certain ways. Pearl answered each question as factually as possible, keeping emotion out of it, presenting herself as an observer reporting what she'd seen and heard. The prosecutor introduced documents seized from the saloon, from Verner's office, from the judge's chambers. Pearl identified conversations she'd overheard that connected to specific transactions on specific dates. The evidence was damning. Pearl's testimony made it comprehensible. Then came cross-examination. Verner's lawyer was a polished man from Kansas City named Harrison, who'd built his career defending powerful people from the consequences of their actions. He approached Pearl with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Callahan, you testified that you worked at Blackwell's Saloon for 6 years. That's quite a long time to spend in such an establishment. What exactly did your work entail beyond serving drinks?" Pearl saw the trap immediately. "I already answered that. I served drinks, cleaned, managed inventory." Managed inventory. That's an interesting way to describe it. Harrison held up a document. "According to the saloon's employment records, you were listed as an entertainer. What did you entertain?" "The records are misleading. I poured whiskey and cleared tables." "Really? Because I have testimony from multiple patrons who describe Blackwell's as offering more than just whiskey. They describe women who provided companionship of a more intimate nature. Were you one of those women, Miss Callahan? Margaret Wells stood immediately. Objection. Miss Callahan's personal history is irrelevant to the charges being heard. It's relevant to her credibility, Your Honor. If she's lying about the nature of her employment, why should we believe her testimony about anything else? The judge, a federal appointee, not part of Black Hollow's corruption, considered this. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Harrison. The witness's character assassination has limits. Harrison turned back to Pearl, emboldened. I'll ask again. Were you a prostitute, Miss Callahan? Pearl felt every eye in the courtroom on her, felt the weight of the question designed to reduce her to shame and silence. She thought about lying, about protecting herself with careful words and implications. Then she thought about Nathan standing against the back wall, about Lily sitting in the witness room waiting her turn, about every woman who'd ever been asked this question with the assumption that honesty would destroy her. No, I was not a prostitute. I served drinks to men who sometimes made propositions I declined. Some of the other women at the saloon did accept those propositions because they needed the money and saw no other options. But I was never one of them, regardless of what the employment records say. But you worked in an establishment that facilitated prostitution. You benefited from that business. I worked in an establishment that paid me enough to eat and survive. That's what I benefited from. The rest of what happened there isn't my responsibility any more than it's yours for defending men who stole people's land. The courtroom stirred. Harrison's smile tightened. So you claim you were innocent of the saloon's activities while simultaneously claiming you witnessed extensive criminal conspiracy. Which is it, Miss Callahan? Were you observant enough to gather this detailed testimony, or were you oblivious to your surroundings? I was observant about what men said when they thought I was too insignificant to matter. That's different from participating in what they discussed. Convenient. Tell me, how much are the federal marshals paying you for this testimony? Nothing. Nothing? You expect us to believe you're testifying out of pure civic duty? A woman who spent 6 years in a corrupt saloon suddenly discovers her conscience? Pearl met his eyes steadily. I'm testifying because Deputy Crow asked me to, because Marshal Coleman gave me the opportunity to tell the truth, and because I'm tired of watching powerful men destroy people without consequences. No one's paying me. No one offered me anything except the chance to make 6 years of silence mean something. How noble. And your relationship with Deputy Crow, that has nothing to do with your testimony? My relationship with Deputy Crow is that he offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. If that seems suspicious to you, maybe examine why kindness looks like conspiracy. Harrison changed tactics, spending the next hour trying to poke holes in Pearl's timeline, her memory, her ability to distinguish between different conversations and transactions. But Pearl had spent 6 years developing the skill of remembering details while appearing forgettable herself. She answered each question with facts, with dates, with specifics that matched the seized documents too closely to be fabricated. By the time Harrison finished, he looked frustrated. Pearl felt exhausted, but still standing. Lily testified next, corroborating portions of Pearl's account and adding her own observations about Judge Haskins and his involvement in fixing trials. Her testimony was shorter but equally damaging. The defense tried the same character assassination, but Lily had learned from watching Pearl. She answered honestly without apologizing for surviving however she'd had to survive. The hearing lasted 3 days. Witnesses testified, documents were examined, lawyers argued about admissibility and credibility, and whether frontier justice could coexist with actual law. Through it all, Pearl sat in the courtroom watching her testimony either vindicate or condemn her depending on how the judge interpreted the evidence. On the 3rd day, the judge delivered his preliminary ruling. The charges would proceed to formal trial. The accused would remain in federal custody without bail, given the severity of the crimes and the risk of witness intimidation. And the court recognized that Miss Callahan and Miss Lily's testimony, combined with the documentary evidence, established probable cause that systematic corruption had indeed occurred in Black Hollow. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others shouted protests. Werner's wife screamed something about injustice and persecution. Federal marshals restored order with difficulty. Pearl sat in the witness chair feeling oddly detached. They'd won. Not completely. The trial itself would take months. and there was still risk that clever lawyers would find ways to create reasonable doubt. But they'd won the first battle. The court believed her. The system, however imperfect, had listened to a saloon girl's testimony and found it credible enough to move forward. Outside the courthouse, the crowd that had gathered was divided and angry. Nathan pushed through it with Pearl and Lily flanked by deputies, ignoring shouted insults and questions. They made it to Nathan's house without incident, locked the door behind them, and stood in the main room breathing hard from adrenaline and relief. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done," Lily said quietly. "You did it well," Nathan told her. "You both did." Pearl sank into a chair. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for the trial. Now the defense lawyers spend months trying to build their case. Now we try to return to something approaching normal life while the county processes what just happened." "Normal life?" Pearl laughed without humor. "I don't think I've had that since I was 16. "Then maybe it's time you did." Over the following weeks, Black Hollow slowly, painfully began to shift. The arrests and hearing had cracked something fundamental in the town's structure. Some of the cracks revealed rot that needed excising. Others revealed people who'd been silent about corruption because they'd assumed speaking up was pointless. With the federal prosecution moving forward, those people started speaking. More homesteaders came forward with stories of stolen land. More victims of Judge Haskins' manipulated trials requested reviews of their cases. The federal marshals established a temporary office in town to handle the flood of complaints and revelations. What Pearl had exposed turned out to be just the visible surface of corruption that had roots throughout the entire county. The Werner family's business collapsed within a month. Without Councilman Werner's influence and with James facing his own charges for attempted murder, their land holdings got seized as proceeds of criminal enterprise. The property was redistributed to families who'd lost it through fraud. Watching the Werner empire disintegrate felt like justice. Though Pearl took no pleasure in it, she'd destroyed men's lives to expose their crimes, and that weight didn't get lighter just because those men deserved it. Judge Haskins died of a heart attack 6 weeks after the hearing. The defense claimed stress from false persecution. The prosecution noted he'd been aware of his heart condition and had refused medical treatment. Either way, he escaped prison, but not consequences. Sheriff Briggs took a plea deal in exchange for testimony against the others. He'd serve 5 years in federal prison rather than 15, and Pearl had to accept that his cooperation mattered more than her desire to see him punished fully. Justice, she was learning, was messy and imperfect, and often looked nothing like vengeance. Through all of it, Pearl stayed in Nathan's house. And somewhere in the weeks of waiting for trial and processing trauma and learning what came after survival, the arrangement stopped feeling temporary. She cooked. He cleaned. They argued about coffee strength and whether the garden needed more watering. Lily moved into her own room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, but visited often, bringing news and gossip and a friendship Pearl hadn't expected to find. The town's attitude toward Pearl shifted gradually. Not everyone forgave her for exposing the corruption. Some families whose fortunes had depended on Werner and Haskins left town entirely. Others stayed and glared whenever they saw her. But enough people recognized what she'd done, what she'd risked, that Pearl could walk the streets without feeling constantly threatened. Some women even nodded to her in passing. A few stopped to thank her quietly for her courage. Pearl didn't feel courageous. She felt like someone who'd survived by accident and stubbornness and Nathan Crow's inexplicable faith in her. One evening in late October, nearly 4 months after the raid that had started everything, Nathan came home with news. "The trial's been scheduled, January. They're bringing in a jury from outside the county to avoid bias." Pearl set down the potato she was peeling. "And after the trial, the men are convicted or acquitted. If convicted, they serve their sentences, and you're free to decide what comes next in your life." "What if I don't know what comes next?" Nathan sat across from her at the kitchen table they'd repaired after the fire. "Then you figure it out one day at a time, same way you've been figuring out everything else." "That's not very reassuring. It's honest. Pearl, you've spent months waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the next attack, for everything to fall apart. And it hasn't. The corruption's being addressed. The bad men are in custody. You're safe. At some point, you're going to have to accept that maybe this is what winning looks like." "Winning feels a lot like being exhausted and terrified. That's because you're not used to it yet. Give it time." Pearl studied him across the table. This man who'd upended his life for a stranger, who'd stood between her and violence repeatedly, who'd somehow convinced her that speaking up mattered. What about you? What comes next for Deputy Nathan Crow? Depends. On what? On whether you meant what you said about that kiss being specifically me and not just the nearest person. Pearl's breath caught. They'd been dancing around this conversation for months, both of them too careful with their wounds and fears to push toward anything definite. But maybe Nathan was right. Maybe at some point you had to accept that you'd survived and start building whatever came after survival. I meant it, she said quietly. It was you, specifically. Then what comes next for me depends on what comes next for you. If you want to stay in Black Hollow, I stay. If you want to leave and start over somewhere else, I'll come with you if you'll have me. If you want to disappear into witness protection and forget you ever knew me, I'll accept that even though it'll hurt. But Pearl, what I want is a life with you in it, whatever shape that takes. Pearl had spent 6 years teaching herself not to hope for anything beyond survival, had spent her whole life learning that good things got taken away, that trust was dangerous, that wanting anything made you vulnerable to losing it. But sitting across from Nathan in this kitchen they'd defended together, in this house that had become something like home, she realized that hope wasn't the enemy. Fear of hope was. I want to stay, she said. Not forever necessarily, but for now. I want to see this trial through. I want to watch the county rebuild into something better than what it was. And I want to figure out who Pearl Callahan is when she's not just surviving. And after you figure that out, ask me then. Nathan smiled. That's the same answer you gave me months ago. Maybe I'm a creature of habit. Maybe you're just careful, which is fair. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but it felt like a promise, like an anchor, like the beginning of something that might actually last. Pearl, I need you to know something. What you did, testifying, exposing the corruption, standing up when standing up could have gotten you killed, that changed this county, changed it permanently. There are families who got their land back because of you. There are people who've learned that speaking up matters because you showed them it was possible. You might not feel like a hero, but that's what you are to a lot of folks here. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got tired of staying silent. That's what heroes are. Just regular people who get tired of accepting the unacceptable. Pearl wanted to argue, but couldn't find the angle. Maybe Nathan was right. Maybe heroism wasn't some grand destiny. Maybe it was just ordinary people making hard choices and refusing to back down when those choices got difficult. If I'm a hero, Pearl said slowly, then so are you. You're the one who listened when I told you about the corruption. You're the one who brought in the marshals. You're the one who stood between me and every attack. Don't pretend you just followed my lead. We followed each other's lead. That's how partnerships work. Is that what we are? Partners? I'd like to think so, though I'm hoping we might become something more when you're ready. Pearl felt heat rise in her face. Nathan Crow, are you asking me to marry you? Not yet, but I'm letting you know I plan to eventually. Consider it fair warning. Despite everything, Pearl laughed. That's the least romantic proposal warning I've ever heard. You've heard others. No, but I've read books. Books lie. Real life is messier and less eloquent, but it's honest. Nathan squeezed her hand gently. I love you, Pearl. Not because you're a mission or a responsibility or a way to redeem myself, but because you're brave and sharp and honest in ways that make me want to be better. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to build a life with you, formally, legally, whatever way you'll accept. Pearl's throat felt tight. Nobody had ever said those words to her. Nobody had ever offered her a future that looked like choice instead of necessity. She didn't know how to respond except with the same honesty Nathan had offered her. I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'll ever be the kind of woman who knows how to be married or build a normal life, but I know I feel safer with you than I felt anywhere else. And I know that when I imagine the future, you're in it. So maybe that's enough for now. That's more than enough. They sat together in the kitchen as evening darkened into night. Two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something unexpected from the wreckage. Outside, Black Hollow continued its slow transformation from corrupt frontier town into something that might actually deserve the word justice. Inside, Pearl let herself hope. The trial in January was shorter than expected. With Briggs testifying for the prosecution and the evidence overwhelming, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all charges within 3 days of deliberation. Councilman Verner and Samuel Blackwell received 15-year sentences in federal prison. James Verner got 10 years for attempted murder and witness intimidation. Judge Haskins, already dead, was formally stripped of his position posthumously, and all his rulings were opened for review. Pearl watched the verdicts come in and felt something settle in her chest. Not victory exactly, not satisfaction, just the quiet knowledge that she'd done what she'd set out to do. She'd told the truth, and the truth had mattered. After the trial ended, Marshal Coleman offered Pearl the witness protection placement one final time. She declined. Lily accepted it, choosing to start fresh in a town where nobody knew her history. They said goodbye on a cold February morning, two women who'd survived the same circumstances and chosen different paths forward. "You sure you want to stay?" Lily asked, hugging Pearl tightly. "I'm sure. This is home now, strange as that sounds." "Not strange. Brave. You're the brave one, starting completely over, building something from nothing. We're both brave, just different kinds." Lily pulled back, smiled through tears. "Thank you, Pearl, for showing me it was possible to fight back. I wouldn't have testified without you going first. Then I guess we saved each other." After Lily left, Pearl returned to Nathan's house and found him in the garden, working on early spring planting. She watched him for a moment, this man who'd become her anchor, her partner, her unlikely future, and felt something shift inside her, a decision taking shape, a question ready to be answered. "Nathan." He looked up, smiled. "How was the goodbye?" "Hard, good, both." Pearl moved closer. "I've been thinking about what you said about building a life together, about that warning you gave me that you'd eventually ask." Nathan straightened, suddenly very still. And I think you should ask now, before I overthink it and get scared again. Pearl, ask me, Nathan, please." He crossed the distance between them, took both her hands, and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Pearl Callahan, will you marry me? Will you stay here in this house, and this town, and this messy life we've built together? Will you let me love you and argue with you about coffee and defend you from anyone who dares suggest you're anything less than extraordinary?" Pearl felt tears she hadn't expected. "Yes, to all of it, yes." Nathan kissed her then, properly. Not the impulsive, desperate kiss she'd given him before walking into danger, but something deeper. Something that tasted like promise and future, and the radical act of choosing hope over fear. They married in April, under skies so blue they seemed impossible after the gray winter. The wedding was small. Mrs. Chen, a few townspeople who'd become friends, Marshal Coleman, who'd traveled back for the occasion, and the minister who'd once compared Pearl to biblical wickedness but had somehow been convinced to perform the ceremony anyway. Pearl wore a simple dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew. Nathan wore his deputy uniform because it was the nicest thing he owned. They stood in front of the rebuilt garden and made promises to each other while Black Hollow watched with emotions ranging from approval to lingering disapproval to simple acceptance that these two unlikely people had decided to build something together. When the minister pronounced them married, the small crowd applauded. Pearl looked at Nathan, her husband somehow, impossibly, and felt the weight of 6 years of survival lift slightly, not disappear. She'd always carry those years and what they'd cost her. But they didn't define her anymore. She'd become something more. Someone more. That night, in the house that was now legally theirs, Nathan asked her what she was thinking. "I'm thinking about how strange life is. 6 months ago, I was pouring whiskey in a saloon and teaching myself not to hope for anything. Now I'm married to a deputy, and people thank me on the street for testifying against corruption. How does that even happen?" "One choice at a time. You chose to tell me the truth. I chose to listen. We chose to fight back. The rest followed." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Not easy, but simple. You see something wrong, you decide whether to accept it or change it. You accepted it for 6 years because that was survival. Then you decided to change it. That's all." Pearl thought about that. "What do you think I should do now that survival isn't the only goal?" "Whatever you want. That's the point of freedom. You get to decide." "I've never been good at deciding things for myself." "Then practice. Start small. What do you want for breakfast tomorrow? That's ridiculous. It's practice. What do you want? Pearl considered. Eggs, and coffee that's not too strong even though you're wrong about mine being too strong. Nathan laughed. See? You're already getting better at this. Over the following months, Pearl did practice. She learned that she liked gardening more than she expected. Liked the rhythm of planting and tending and watching things grow from effort and patience. She helped Nathan with his deputy work sometimes, her knowledge of the county's residents and relationships proving useful in ways neither of them had anticipated. She started teaching reading to some of the younger women in town who'd never had the opportunity to learn. Small things, normal things, the kind of life she'd never imagined she could have. The county rebuilt itself slowly. New officials were elected, people who'd been vetted by federal oversight to ensure the corruption didn't immediately regenerate. The stolen land redistributions took years to sort out completely, but they happened. Families returned. New homesteaders arrived, drawn by news that Black Hollow was cleaning itself up and might actually be worth settling in. Pearl watched it all and understood that what she'd done, what she and Nathan and Lily had done together, had genuinely mattered. They'd changed something fundamental. Not perfectly, not completely. The world was still full of corrupt men and broken systems and people who chose power over justice. But in this one county, on this one piece of frontier, they'd proven that speaking up could actually work. That ordinary people could hold powerful men accountable if they were brave enough to try. And maybe that was the lesson Pearl had learned through all of it. Courage wasn't something you were born with. It wasn't a permanent state. It was a choice you made over and over again, in small moments and large ones, when staying silent was easier but speaking up was necessary. She'd been silent for 6 years, and that had been the right choice for survival. Then she'd chosen to speak, and that had changed everything. The thing about courage, Pearl realized, was that it was contagious. Her choice to testify had inspired Lily to testify. Their combined testimony had encouraged other victims to come forward. Those revelations had sparked federal intervention that spread beyond Black Hollow to neighboring counties. One woman's decision to tell the truth had rippled outward in ways she'd never anticipated. That terrified her and humbled her in equal measure. One evening in late summer, Pearl and Nathan sat on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie. They'd spent the day working in the garden, their hands dirty and their backs sore, and everything feeling simple and good in ways Pearl still hadn't quite gotten used to. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Everything that happened? The testimony, the danger, how hard it all was?" Pearl thought about that honestly. "Sometimes, when I remember how scared I was, or when I see families who still hate me for what I exposed. But mostly no. Because this," she gestured at the house, the garden, the town visible in the distance, "this wouldn't exist if I'd stayed silent. And I'd still be who I was in that saloon, surviving but not living. I prefer living. Even though living is harder, especially because living is harder. Surviving is just running out the clock. Living is actually building something. And I've spent too many years just running out the clock." Nathan took her hand, rough from garden work and everything they'd built together. "I'm proud of you. I know I've said it before, but it bears repeating. What you did took more courage than anything I've seen. What we did. Don't forget your role in all this. Our role, then. What we did together." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered. Somewhere in town, people were living their lives, eating supper, arguing over nothing, making love, making plans. Ordinary life in a town that was slowly becoming ordinary again after years of extraordinary corruption. Pearl had helped make that possible. She'd been brave when bravery felt impossible. She'd spoken up when silence was safer. She'd chosen hope over fear. And she'd discovered that sometimes, just sometimes, the world rewarded that kind of courage with something that looked like happiness. It wasn't perfect. Pearl still had nightmares about the firebomb, about James Verner lunging at her, about all the ways her choice to testify could have ended badly. Nathan still worried constantly about her safety, even though the immediate danger had passed. The town still had people who looked at Pearl and saw only what she'd been, not what she'd become. But they had each other. They had this house, this life. This future they were building one choice at a time. And most days, that was enough. Pearl Callahan had spent 6 years learning how to survive. Now she was spending her days learning how to live. And she was discovering that living, real living, with hope and choice, and someone who loved her for exactly who she was worth every moment of fear it had taken to get here. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something that mattered. She was becoming someone who mattered. And that, Pearl thought, as she sat on the porch with Nathan's hand in hers and the future stretching out before them uncertain but possible, was the greatest victory of all. Not that she'd destroyed corrupt men or changed a county or become someone people called brave, but that she'd learned she deserved more than survival, that she'd claimed that more for herself, that she'd discovered her voice was powerful enough to reshape her entire world. The saloon girl everyone had dismissed had proven she was so much more than anyone had imagined, including herself. And somewhere in the quiet evening, with the prairie wind carrying the smell of growing things and the promise of tomorrow, Pearl Callahan finally allowed herself to believe that she was exactly where she belonged.